Well, change is finally coming to Qatar, or at least so it seems. After years of being criticised by human rights groups for effectively treating migrant workers like slaves, it's bringing in new laws this week to protect them. This tiny, super-rich Gulf state is being watched closely as it prepares to host the World Cup in 2022. But will the laws really help? Mobin Nassir takes a look.
The winner to organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
Qatar's rulers want to reinvent the oil-rich country as a major tourist hub. And nearly 2 million migrant workers have gone there to turn their dreams into reality. But many now say their lives have instead turned into nightmares.
Every day they wake us at 4 in the morning. If we ask for food, they say, "Have you come to eat or work?"
These men are crammed into labor camps with 8 to 10 in each room, often without electricity or proper sanitation. And even when their contracts end, they can't go home.
Around 95% peace contract. Right. And we want to go home, but no.
Others say they've been swindled out of their promised salaries and have suffered other abuses.
They are not paying my salary, and they deported my friend without paying him.
But a new labor law has now been introduced, and officials say it will help these employees. From this week, it will be illegal for employers to confiscate passports, and salaries must be paid on time. Workers will also be allowed to find new jobs without a no-objection certificate from their current employers.
Maybe it was of the old time, of the old era, to have an exit permit and an entry permit. The NOC, the Kafala per se, and the exit will be something of the past.
But critics say the new law has so many exceptions and caveats that it actually offers workers little new protection.
This is simply a case of new labels on bad old laws. The system of modern slavery remains intact in Qatar.
These changes have been a long time coming, and workers here say it's too early to say whether their lives will change, but they're not holding high hopes. Mobin Nassir, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, we are joined by Fabien, a campaigner for Amnesty International. He's in London. And from Detroit, I'm joined by Shabina, Khatri, who is the executive editor of Doha News. Shabina, if we could just start with you. You helped set up this news agency in Doha, which a lot of people in that country rely on for their news. It's not controlled by the state. Tell us, what have been your observations over the 10 years or so that you lived there?
Yeah, so in the past decade or so, the idea of changing the Kafala system has been talked about a lot. And now we've kind of seen a little bit of progress with the new labor reforms. And it's not a lot of progress in that expats still need exit permits and no objection certificates to change jobs for the most part and leave the country. But there now is a grievance committee in case your employer doesn't let you leave. And there are some ways that people can switch jobs without needing their employer's approval.
Just explain the NOC note that's so crucial, the no objection certificate. Why is it so important?
Excuse me. Yes, so the way it worked before the new law took effect, if you wanted to change jobs because you got a better offer from somebody, for example, and your employer said no, you couldn't. You would have to leave Qatar and wait 2 years before you could even consider coming back again. And now under the new law, if you have finished your contract, if it's 2 years long, for example, then you're free to move to another job without your prior employer's approval. So that's pretty huge for people. But also, if you don't have a contract end, then you have to wait a full 5 years before you can switch jobs without your employer's approval, which I know has drawn criticism from rights groups.
Fabien, what do you make of the changes?
I'd echo what Shabina says in that these changes really don't go far enough. The fundamental drivers of abuse still are in place. As Shabina said, there are some changes. Migrant workers can now change jobs without requiring the permission of their employer, but that is only after they've completed that contract, and that can last for up to 5 years. Similarly, there is this new grievance committee with regards to exiting, but fundamentally the exit permit system stays in place in that migrant workers still initially need to seek the approval of their employer to leave. And this is just inconsistent with delivering freedom of movement for migrant workers. And that's why these reforms really do not deliver the fundamental changes that we wanted to see in terms of changing the relationship between employers and migrant workers. The power dynamic very much remains in favour of an employer and therefore a driver of potential abuses.
So for the benefit of our viewers then, it's really an incredible shock for them to imagine that an employer has such power over them. They can't leave the country, they can't change jobs and so on. And it allows for abuses, doesn't it, Fabien?
Yes, exactly. The government of Qatar actually commissioned a law firm to review its labour laws in 2 years ago, I think. And the conclusion of that law firm, the government's own report that was commissioned, was that this Kafala system does drive abuses. And those same tools which abusive employers use to exploit workers are very much still there. As you said, the power imbalance is quite extraordinary in that an employer can determine whether a migrant worker can change jobs, whether they can leave the country. An employer can also report a migrant worker to the police for absconding, for working without permission for another employer. So that's an incredible level of control which an employer holds over a migrant worker. It creates an environment of real fear.
Right.
And also the fact that Qatar has retained the exit permit is really, really disappointing. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN have all called for the unambiguous abolishment of the restriction on migrant workers being able to return home. The fact that that has been retained is quite damning.
Shabina, as I said, you provide a news service there. Do migrant workers who are in trouble ever come to your news organisation for help?
Yes, all the time. And I want to define migrant worker. So the way Qatar is, it's like 90% of it is foreigners, right? So only the local population is very small, maybe 10% of the population, which is one reason why these controls are in place, because the locals want to feel like, they aren't going to be taken advantage of or put in trouble in their own country or put in peril. So we always get complaints from people who, from blue-collar expats who are construction workers, up to, doctors and people who have been laid off from jobs at some of the highest levels that you could get laid off in, because they also don't have their rights. So the way it's painted a lot, migrant workers, you think of a poor person, but we get complaints across the board.
Shabina Khatri and Fabien Goa, thank you very much for your contributions to Money Talks.